This choir survived the choir apocalypse, floods, pandemics, and the departure of their longtime founder. You're going to want to stick around to listen to this one. Welcome to the business of choir, helping your choir thrive and survive in the 21st century. And I have with me today the very respected artistic director of the Vancouver Chamber Choir, Kari Turunen. And so if you enjoy this content, please press the like button. We're going to do one video every week. And so if you'd like to be notified about more in the future, subscribe and press the bell. And Kari, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so great to have you on. I know I spoke to a lot of people about who they would like to see interviewed, and you were one of the very top candidates. So I'm really glad that you're here.
That's nice to hear. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll jump right in. I think one of the first things, obviously you are from Finland, and Finland has this very strong music culture. I've been there a few times, really enjoyed singing at different choral festivals and such. But how do you, for everybody else's benefit, how did you wind up being the artistic director of a choir on the west coast of Canada?
Well, it's both a long and a short story. I'll give you the short version. I happened to see an announcement, a job announcement, in the Facebook feed of an American friend of mine. And I was, oh, this is unusual. Professional choirs don't very often have an open announcement. So they sort of tend to have visitors, and then they choose a visitor they like most or something like this. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And without thinking more about it, I sort of sent in my papers. And there was this system that they described where there would be a short list, and the people that get on the short list would be able to do an audition, a live audition with the choir, that is, lead a concert. And I sort of, that was plenty for me. That if I thought I'd make the short list, I'm really happy. I get to go to Vancouver, a place I love, and make music with some wonderful musicians, and great. And then if there's anything beyond that, then I'll have a think about that afterwards. And I think, well, the audition went fine. I mean, it's never easy with a new choir. So there's always sort of just friction because people don't know each other that well. Not mental friction, but just physical friction. But then I thought the interviews and all that went pretty well. And I thought, yeah, maybe it's not impossible. But then the process was still ongoing. So I forgot about the whole thing. And then suddenly about half a year later, I got an email saying that they'd be interested in my services. And that was a real crisis for us. We now sort of up and leave and go to the other side of the world. And we had a week with my wife where we decided that on every second day, we'll list the good things about going. And on every second day, we'll list all the bad ones.
So you have your pros and cons, yeah?
Third or fourth day, and we looked at each other and said, we're going, aren't we? And that's how it came to be.
That's wonderful. And of course, people in Vancouver would be familiar with the fact that Jon Washburn was the founding director some 50 years ago. And was kind of both in charge of the musical and administrative roles for that period of time. And I wonder, what was it like to inherit an organization that had been so long in the hands of somebody else, and the founding director, no less?
Well, I never thought it would be easy, because just I've seen these processes and they're never sort of straightforward. Considering that, I think it's gone swimmingly well. I mean, there's been little things like the pandemic and so on, but just that the takeover has been, I think it's been surprisingly fluent. And when I came, I tried to sort of show my respect to both Jon and the history of the choir, for example, by not changing everything straight off the bat, but just having a look, getting to know the lay of the land, and then start making adjustments into the direction that I feel is necessary. And I have to say that sort of Jon has been very discreet and supportive. I think that's one major factor in that it's sort of gone well. He's been around, but he hasn't sort of tried to stay in too much, but he's been sort of supportive and there when I need him. So I have to say that it's gone much better than I thought. Of course, the choir was drilled in his way of making music, and anyone who comes will make music in a different way.
Yes.
So that's always a sort of, and it's a gradual change. But I think, all in all, it's gone surprisingly well.
That's right. Yeah. And I know there was one interesting story that a lot of us, maybe before you actually came, but there was a flood at the beautiful building that is the house of Vancouver Chamber Choir, and that a lot of the music was lost. And I personally was wondering whether that caused you any trouble.
Well, I mean, if that's going to happen at any point in time, the best time is when you change artistic directors, because the basic repertoires will be different. But that said, there's been a lot of times when, do we have that? No, we don't have
that. Not anymore.
But then just well, we just decided sort of, okay, well, this is it. It's sort of a reset of sorts, and let's look forward and then build the library according to the music that we're singing now. But of course, it'd be lovely to just to refer back to the library. I think we lost something like 2/3 of the scores. So, and most of those are replaceable, but then there were some things that were handwritten and by the composers and so on. But so lots of losses, but it's not really hindered us too much, to be honest.
Right. Yeah, it allows me to have this this narrative of it being apocalyptic because there's floods and pandemics.
Yeah, it does sound biblical, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I'm really interested to hear, you have a unique perspective, having sort of come up in music in Europe, in Finland particularly, and then winding up here working. And I would love to hear your thoughts about how the environment, the cultural environment perhaps, or the way that choirs are supported is different in Europe compared to here in Canada or North America.
Well, just as a caveat, Europe is huge, and the cultures are so different from each other. So I'll just stick to sort of my neck of the woods, the Nordic countries, a little bit the Baltic countries, and then again, Northern America is huge, and sort of what's common with, Vancouver and Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
So, I'll also sort of just talk about Canada that I know more about, and I think the way to approach it, in my view, is pretty much follow the money. Whatever choral culture you meet around the world, if you ask, where's the money being put, you'll see the response. You'll understand why the culture is like it is. Now, as a great example, I went to Singapore for the first time around 15 years ago to work there, and the school choirs were absolutely amazing. I mean, the sort of the last two classes of their high school, just amazing. And I was sort of taken aback, how is this? And then it seemed that there wasn't much choral singing outside schools at all. Community choirs, not many at all. Professional choirs, no. So it was really strange. And I asked, and it came about that the schools have a ranking system. All the schools are ranked from top to bottom.
Okay.
And at one point they introduced, besides the academic subjects, they also introduced the arts. And so you could get sort of points in ranking through the level of your choir or your sports teams and so on. And schools went, okay, this is a good way to sort of get a few additional points. And they started employing conductors from outside the schools. So there were not only teachers running the choirs, but also professional conductors, which naturally sort of gave conductors a lot of work and raised the level of the school choirs sort of to a very high level.
I see.
So it was sort of the money that was poured into that system, in the sense that the schools put money into their choirs. And wherever you go around the world and you see a choral culture, then I always sort of start with sort of the old adage, follow the money.
Follow the money.
And in Finland, the money has gone to music education, a broad music education system, which means that it's sort of an extracurricular music school system, plus then music classes in schools. And that's really, if you sort of look at the amount of, well, say Finnish conductors, singers, and so on, instrumentalists, coming out of that small country and going around the world is immense. And it comes just from the level of the educational system. Whereas you look at England, you'll find like it's the cathedral schools. The Anglican Church has put a lot of money into the choir systems, the choir schools. And then if we look at Canada, I think the nature of the choral culture here is probably colored most by the professional choirs, of which there are quite a few. I mean, we're talking about 10 around the country, and it's not a huge country, sort of worldwide, seen population-wise. And then probably the church choirs that there's a lot of a lot of choirs employ professional singers as a core of their church choir and so on. So there may be the two places, plus then university education. So those are the three places where I see the money has gone here, and they give you a certain lay of the land. So it's never, I don't think it's just a culture that breeds a culture, but it's also sort of what has been supported. If you go to Latvia, you can find that they've put money into anything choral. From children to full professionals. It's just an amazing culture, but it must cost a lot for the state.
Right. Well, I live here in Canada, so my interest personally, locally, is that there might be more money going through the choral system. I asked David Cousins, my previous guest, whether there were in fact lobbyists for the choir world in Canada, and he kind of said, yes, there are, but they need to do a better job. So as a follow-on question, I'd love to hear your thought about that. What could we be doing to get more support from the federal and provincial governments?
Okay, I'll start by saying that the support here is actually already pretty good, but I do agree. It's such a huge community, and it has so many sort of beneficial sides on all levels that I think it's something that it's a no-brainer that for the state and the province and the cities to support. It just makes sense because it's a really good activity. It's sort of very cheap to begin. It's very accessible. The diversity in choral music is much greater, say, than in other forms of classical music often. Mm-hmm. So, you're looking at a very, very good phenomenon and something worthwhile supporting. But, worldwide scene, I think there is some good reason to also thank the powers that be for supporting choral music in Canada so well.
Right. It's good to hear that.
Yeah, definitely. And especially during the pandemic, I thought it was wonderful that the emphasis on culture and keeping the cultural institutions alive was fantastic. I mean, I'll never stop singing songs of praise to the Canadian government for that.
Oh, it's very good. That's a great segue actually into the next idea. Of course, it's been a pretty rough couple of years for choirs all over the world. And to the audience, if you're listening now and your choir survived the pandemic, just write the word yes down in the comments along with the name of your group. That would be great. So, and the question that a number of people would like me to ask you is, how does a top-tier professional choir like the Vancouver Chamber Choir stay alive and relevant in this post-pandemic world where I believe audiences are kind of small? Like, how have you adapted? What are you doing differently now?
Well, it's a $1 million question, isn't it? And basically those two words, alive and relevant, are, they're our mission whenever. Yeah. So it's just maybe a different environment that we find ourselves in, but I think those two words need to guide what we do in all times. Of course, when the years are fat and there's money is abundant, you easily forget these questions. But in a way, I think we've all had to sharpen our minds in this situation and rethink things. whether the smaller audiences is a permanent thing remains to be seen naturally. I mean, we can't judge yet, really. I think we were talking, I think most sort of classical institutions are saying something like maybe 60%, 70% of pre-pandemic audience figures would be where we have been at now. But our minds change about the pandemic all the time, and if there is a founded optimism that starts to take hold, then I think some will, recover some of that lost ground. But yeah, I think that even if we had, this was going on, this same discussion before the pandemic, that our audiences are getting older and they're diminishing and so on. And I think the responses I see are quite varied, but probably we're not addressing the one thing that the choral scene is not really good at, which is marketing. I mean, most of the time when people come to a concert, say like a Phoenix concert, they're very happy that they came. They enjoy it. So it's not that the product is somehow bad and we have to sort of lie about it. We actually have a very good product. I mean, we can do better always and blah, blah, blah. But it's not too bad as it is, but we're not very good at convincing people of its quality and its interest and how interesting it actually is.
You're right. I think that's a huge area of growth for almost all choral organizations.
Definitely. And I think that we're only starting to embrace the idea that we actually have to reach out to, and when we say new audiences, we often seem to think that, by singing this and that, we'll reach to new audiences. It doesn't happen that way. I don't know of one single, or maybe I know a couple of choirs that have managed to rejuvenate their audience by what they sing. Mm-hmm. But I think mostly it's a question of really presenting what we have in an interesting way, in a relevant way, in a language that people understand, and in media that people use. So I think we have a lot of challenges in sort of moving into the 21st century in choral music and all classical music. And I have a feeling that we've talked too much about ourselves, the performers and the music, and we haven't really talked to and about the people that come to the concerts.
Well, this is kind of the essence of marketing, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. What is the experience that we're selling? How do we get people to commit an evening to this? I mean, it's not the price. Sort of, I was just at a baseball game in Vancouver, and that was about the same price as a choral concert, and everyone says it's the cheapest entertainment in town. So, I mean, we're seriously not sort of, tickets aren't $100 at all. They're very reasonable. They're sort of like film, cinema level. So I think it's much more about sort of packaging the experience. Of course, being relevant and singing stuff which has some meaning in this world. That's a no-brainer, right? But mostly, I think it's a question of breaking our own mold a little bit and starting to reach out to people who might be interested in this.
Right. And so also a good segue into the idea of technology and such. I was looking on the Vancouver Chamber Choir website. I noticed it's possible to pay for and see a concert there. I was wondering, how do you, well, this may not be your strength, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Do you know how that is set up and what platform is being used to make it happen?
I don't know about the physical platform, but it is a platform of our own on our pages. So it's sort of a subdivision of our internet pages called VanCC Digital.
Right.
And we scrambled in the fall of 2020. Mm-hmm. Sort of, we have to provide because people either won't come to the concerts or then they couldn't, they were forbidden to come to concerts. We have to keep a connection to our audiences, and we had to just create a platform, which I think was a great blessing, in the sense that the pandemic pushed us to do it much earlier than it would have happened otherwise, I'm afraid.
Right.
And it does have a lot of content, both paid and free. And it's, again, I think, a question of our marketing to make people aware of this platform. And I think now a lot of the concerts are paid content, but I think, with time we'll be freeing some of the older concerts so that you can watch them for free, which I think is a really important thing to have an internet presence as a choir. And we will continue to produce a couple of concerts a year, at least, as video concerts as well. So even if we're thinking that, we're going back to physical in-person concerts, we still do want to continue this for a broader audience internationally, but also just for the people who maybe missed the concert or are not comfortable coming to a concert yet.
Yeah, I often have wondered if the silver lining of the huge change, which was the pandemic, is going to create some new behaviors that people would want to stick with anyway. And of course, now you're saying, yes, we have these digital concerts and we intend to keep doing it. And I guess the question, does it work for you? I mean, the audience, of course, is then global, right? So is it worth doing? Do you find it to be a practice you'll want to continue?
If we just look at it financially, to date, no. You'd have to reach, the production costs are very high, not very high, but they are high for a choral organization. And then the views that you get are still very limited. But I don't think that, again, I don't think it's the fault of the platform or the system. It's really up to us to make that platform more available and then attract people there. And the good thing is, that they're there for forever, as it were.
True.
So that even if you sell a certain amount of views the first time round, they're still there to buy later on as well. So it is a really different thing to the ephemeral choral concert, which happens and then is gone.
Yes.
This thing sticks around, for better or for worse, but it sticks around, which I think is an important addition, and just to have and to also invest a little in.
Yeah, I guess the way to think about it might be that rather than does it work, does it make money? It will make money eventually if people keep paying for it over the years, and the question is how long will it take, right? And then with the marketing angle, improved marketing, maybe we just think about shrinking that time down. So now our payback period for a concert is 3 months instead of 2 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to do in that field, and I think every choir professional or non-professional will struggle with just the amount of work and having the personnel to market it, to administrate it, and so on. I mean, I think everyone knows that the possibilities are almost endless, but the problem is that our resources are not endless at all.
Yeah, indeed. I'm glad you brought up repertoire, because that's often a topic that people love to talk about in choral music, and particularly, how do you go about making those choices? I realize you already said that you don't do it in order to attract a new audience necessarily, but depending on who you're picking repertoire for, how do you go about it? How do you think about it as an artistic director?
There's so many ways. I mean, if you're looking for music for a specific project, you'll probably have a theme, which whittles it down a little bit. It gives you where you're looking and what you're looking for. Whereas if I'm just looking for repertoire, just stuff that I think we could use, that's sort of that's an ongoing process all the time. Sort of, I hear something I like, I follow it up. I go sort of on Spotify, on YouTube, and see if the same composer has different pieces that I like as well. There are certain choirs that I like, and I like their programming. So I often follow what they're doing. I get a lot of suggestions from composers, so that's just sitting down and getting to know the scores and seeing if you like it. But I think the most important consideration is, well, first of all, is this feasible for us? Is it sort of, does it fit us? You know, I'm not going to choose a piece which is written for 48 voices. And then the next one is, do I like it? Sort of, does it appeal to me? Because I've found that when I do music that doesn't really appeal to me, I'm not very happy with the results. Sort of, your heart has to be in it. So that's one thing. And then come the other considerations, like there might be seasonal considerations, thematic, and then a little bit contrary to what you say, that yes, sometimes we absolutely do program to reach out to different audiences. Like we had a concert of music from the Chinese cultures last June, which was very clearly directed to the big Chinese community in Vancouver. So sometimes you do that. And if it's a youth event, you want to choose music where the themes of the pieces somehow reverberate with the thoughts of young people. So there are lots of considerations, but it's sort of, I have no simple answer to how. It's more like always, all the time, just anything you like, sort of earmark it, put it away, come back to it.
Yeah, I suppose so.
It's sort of I think it's one key piece, especially in a professional choir setting, because, you know, if I have to come up with 10 programs for the season, that's a lot of pieces.
Yeah.
So that means continual work, and I do try to sort of keep notes when I get something, and these things would maybe fit well together, and so on. Sometimes it starts from, you know, an individual concert starts from one piece, that this piece is what I want to do, and then all the rest fits in. Yes. And sometimes it's more like it has a theme, and then I start looking for pieces which fit the theme.
Right. So you have to stay very plugged into the whole environment and all the people involved and other choirs, and respecting the theme and the audience, and again, relevance. It's a big job. Yeah.
It's a big job. And staying in contact with composers, I feel, is really interesting and rewarding and important, because they're the people who are giving us a voice, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I often sort of drop some people a line and say, you know, just if you have anything that hasn't been performed, which you feel really should be performed, just let me know, just send me material. And I'm very fortunate to say that they do. A lot of people do approach me with, hey, I've got this piece. And sometimes I can accommodate that, other times I can't, but it's still, that sort of dialogue is really interesting.
Right. If I might ask this question, who are some of the composers that you that have reached out to you or that you've worked with lately?
Well, in BC, there's, for example, Katrina Guimon, Don McDonald, quite a lot, Nick Kelly, Steve Chapman, Gerda Block-Wilson, for example. So that, and then I've had quite a lot of contact with Laura Hawley from Edmonton, who I think is starting to write really, really interesting and skilled choral music. So I do try to sort of, Andrew Balfour, so lots of people, and I'm sure that, you know, I'm mentioning like the tip of the iceberg, right? And I should reach out to many, many, many more, but it is something I try to do. And I'm really happy. So if any composers are listening, I'm really happy to get your emails, your suggestions. Don't be afraid to approach me.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. And to the audience, if you have repertoire tips that are your favorites, please write them into the comments. I'm sure people would love to hear that as well from you. And so sort of the final question I have for you is, what advice do you have for up and coming young conductors? Kind of like, what would you tell your 20-year-old self to get yourself on the right track for success in this environment?
Well, first of all, you have to define success pretty narrowly, and that you're probably not going to become rich by conducting choirs.
That's fair.
But I'd probably say to myself, I'd probably say follow your heart, because that's been, I've made quite a few U-turns in my life, or veered off the broad path, and every time I've done it, the result has been an added layer of happiness in my life. I've
Right.
felt, and just keep at it. Try to get yourself a choir you can conduct, and then just learn from what you do in practice. A good training it helps, but most of the learning happens after you've studied choral conducting. Every day you learn something you don't really know that well. It's like an old conductor once said that the bad thing about conducting is that death tends to interrupt a well-started career.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
That you never ever learn, never know enough, and music is just sort of an endless companion and challenger that you can always be better, and you can always get more out of it.
right. As long as you have your heart is open and you have humility, then you should be okay.
Yeah, and then I just wish everyone who's in the field just a few breaks. That's all you need. I mean, you do need them. You very seldom sort of earn the breaks that you get, but when you get one, jump at it.
Capitalize on that. So where can people go to find out more about the Vancouver Chamber Choir, Kari?
VancouverChamberChoir.com is the best way to start. And then I really invite everyone to come to one of our concerts. So, and there's a things a very interesting season coming up. Lots of different things for different tastes.
Mm-hmm.
So, choose your favorites from there, and that's what I would suggest.
That's
and there's lots of stuff on our on VanCC Digital, which is free. There's some educational stuff that I think a lot of choral singers would be really interested in. There's a great video on tuning, for example, one on how to work on rhythms and so on. Have a look at those. They're free, and they're pretty snappy, sort of 20-minute things, with lots of interesting stuff. And you hear the choir sing on them as well.
Ah, wonderful. That's great. Thank you so much for being here. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you.
It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks. And everybody else, please remember to like this video if you enjoyed the content. We're going to do one every week, and so if you'd like to see more and be notified, click on the subscribe button and on the bell. Have a great day.